Welcome to Landscape Photo Editing Sessions. I'm Raya Tarakuri. Today I'm going to be processing a telephoto lava picture. So I shot this back in September. So if you come here, don't expect to get the same shot as me because it's always changing. So I shot with an A6000 and the 55 to 210. So you don't really need expensive equipment to get a good shot. So I'm going to get started. I have these two shots. This one's overexposed, but this one has some nice water movement, and it also has a lot more detail since it's overexposed. Exposing for the right, so less noise, and then an underexposed one for the lava. So I'm going to blend these two together. So to get started, I'm going to reduce the exposure of this one. By around 1.4 looks pretty good. I'm also going to increase the shadows a little bit, get more detail in those. Reduce the highlights slightly. And I'm also going to boost up the vibrance to get more color from the lava and the light that it's creating. And then white balance. So I want this to be a bit cooler, to have more of a color contrast, a blue color contrast with the red lava. So I'm gonna take this to the left. Around 5800 looks good. And then I'm gonna balance out the tint so it's less magenta. Alright, so that looks pretty good. I'm also gonna go ahead and sharpen this because this lens isn't very sharp, and also I probably missed focus a little bit. So I'm gonna do quite a big radius to get those bigger edges for sharpening. Alright, I'm gonna go ahead and copy and paste, Shift, Control and C, and then Control Shift V to paste. And I want these to be the same exposure for blending. So this is just a one-stop difference. So this is gonna be, this is actually, I think, a one-stop. I think so. 1.43. All right. And then I'm gonna reduce the highlights just a little bit more in this photo to get more detail in the lava. All right, that's pretty good. Go ahead and select both of them and edit them as layers in Photoshop. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is blend these two together. And I'm just going to do a manual blend, just a simple layer mask will do it. So I'm going to hold down Alt while pressing on the layer mask icon to create a blank layer mask. And then I'm going to use a white brush. I'm going to size that down. And maybe increase the hardness a little bit. All right. Now bring up that opacity back up. And then paint in just the area with the lava. So I'm just going to be careful not to paint over the dark part because it'll appear a little bit different. So I'm just going to do the edges just to fix that blown out highlights. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and fix this. I'm going to go back, use a black brush, lower the opacity, and then just paint this back in so that it blends with the scene. Alright, I'm going to check this. I think I need to take it back a little bit, so I'm going to go with the white brush, paint that back over a little bit. Alright, so that looks pretty good. And that's about it for the blending. Alright, the next thing we want to do is boost up the contrast to bring out more detail and color between the brightness of those steam clouds and the color. So I'm just going to use a curve adjustment layer using the this tool, and I'm just going to go to the up here, bring that up, and go to a dark part and bring it down. Alright, I'm just going to adjust this manually a little bit. Alright, so that looks pretty good. So this is getting a bit too saturated because of the adjustment. So I'm just going to go ahead use the layer mask and brush out the area that looks too saturated. So with maybe 20% opacity with the black brush, and go ahead and brush that out. Alright, so that's much better. Let's get a little bit more. Okay, I think that's good. Alright, the next thing I want to do is increase the contrast in the flowing water here in the foreground. So I'm just going to use another curve adjustment. I'm going to go to this bright area, lift that up a little bit, go to this dark area, and bring that down. So just to darken it a bit more and increase the contrast. So I'm going to go ahead and invert this layer mask with Control I, and then use a white brush to paint that back in. Alright, that looks pretty good. The next thing I want to do is darken up the edges over here a little bit so the eye can focus just on the bright part of the image. So I'm going to darken up the edges. So just with another curve adjustment, and bring that brightness down. Invert that mask with Control I, and then use a white brush with a lower opacity. And then just brush in those brighter parts on the edges. A little bit right here too. Alright, that looks good. Now I want to bring out more detail in the lava rock over here. It's a little bit dark, so I'm also gonna use a curve adjustment for that. And I'm just gonna go out to this steam cloud right here, and I'm just gonna bring that up a little bit, so I bring out more detail in those rocks. And then I'm gonna go to a dark area and just bring that back down just a little bit. So I don't want to darken it, I just want to brighten up some of the brighter parts of the shadows without making it darker in the darker parts. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and invert the mask and brush on to the areas I want affected. Alright, so that's pretty good. And the next thing I want to do, I'm pretty much finished with brightness and contrast. Now I want to adjust the color. I want to add more blue to the image so that I have more of a color contrast between the red lava and then the blue ocean and then the steam. So I'm going to add a curve adjustment. I'm going to change the blending mode to color so that anything I do with this layer won't affect the contrast or brightness. It'll only affect the color. So if I go into the channels, go into my blue channel, I'm going to bring up the blue channel in the shadows or in the dark areas. And then I'm just going to bring this down just a tiny bit in the highlights. Alright, so that brought out a lot more blue tones within the image. And maybe I want a little bit more. So I'm just going to add a bit more. I know it's too much, but I'm going to invert, or I'm just going to brush out the parts I don't want that have too much blue. So I think the rocks have a little bit too much. So I'm going to go ahead and paint that out a little bit. A little bit over here. Okay. Alright, so that looks pretty good. Adds a lot more blue. Makes some more color contrast in the image. Let's see, there's a little bit of red going on over here. I'm going to go ahead and fix that. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm just going to name it color. Whoops. Let's see. And then go ahead and use my brush. I'm going to sample a color from over here. And I'm just going to use a low opacity and brush it onto this part that I want fixed, or I want less red. Alright, so that's pretty good. I have to change this to color so that only affects the color. Alright, so now that I brushed on those areas with the color from over here, it's gonna just change it to the same color, and that looks a bit better. Alright, the final thing I'm gonna do is add a little bit of a glow effect. So I'm gonna create a stamp layer of everything that's visible. So with Control Shift Alt and E, that'll copy everything. And then I'm going to go ahead and blur it. So using Gaussian blur, I'm just going to use 20 pixel radius. I'm going to change the opacity to 10%, so this will affect how strong the effect is. So 10% adds a little bit of the effect, but not too much. And then I'm going to use a curve adjustment, and I'm going to clip it to this layer so that it only affects this layer and not these ones. And then I'll go ahead and add a contrast or S-curve to that. So I just want to bring out more highlights, and I don't want to darken the shadows too much. So this is adding the glow effect, and this is actually affecting how much that is applying to the image. Alright, so that looks pretty good. And that's all to it. And this one's pretty simple. It's all about getting it in camera, capturing the right moment when the lava is flowing and when the waves are receding. So just to recap this, I have my original base exposure that I actually overexposed, and then I blended in with my darker exposure for the blown out highlights in the lava. I then added an overall contrast to the entire image to bring out more detail and darken it down a little bit. It also added more color to the lava and the steam. And then I added more contrast to the water to darken that down and bring out the details within that receding water. I also darkened down the edges a little bit so that the viewer's eye isn't distracted by the bright parts in the edges. I also brought out more detail in the rocks. And then I applied a curve, and I used the blue channel to increase that. So it made more color contrast between the red lava and the blue or blue hour kind of look. And then I used just a color layer to take out the red tones over here. And finally a glow effect to wrap it up and add a nice glow to the image. Alright, so thanks for watching this, and if you enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't done so already.